Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today we check in with Harris and Trump on the campaign trail and take a look at some of the latest polling. Plus, a month after Helene, we hear stories of heroism and heartbreak out of North Carolina. Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and Republican nominee Donald Trump are making their final pitches to voters this week. Harris was at a rally in Ann Arbor, Michigan on Monday. In her speech to the crowd, she emphasized that the country is fighting for democracy.
And let's be clear, we are all here because we are fighting for a democracy and for the right of people to be heard and seen. We're not about the enemy within. We know we are all in this together. That's what we are fighting for.
She also called out Donald Trump's behavior and warned of potential consequences should he make it to the White House again.
We can all see that Donald Trump is even more unstable and more unhinged, and now he wants unchecked power.
Yesterday in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump responded to the critiques lobbed at his campaign regarding Puerto Rico.
I think no president's done more for Puerto Rico than I have.
Trump's Sunday Madison Square Garden rally included racist remarks from several speakers, and at one point, comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, among the speakers at the event, referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Trump also expounded on his belief that America is poorly managed by those currently in office.
We have a country that's been run by fools. It's been run by stupid people, low IQ individuals. They really are. They're low IQ.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are neck and neck in their efforts to win over voters in key battleground states. The latest polls show tight races between the two presidential candidates in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and North Carolina. And nationally, a morning consult poll showed Harris leading Trump 50 to 47%, while a new survey from Reuters Ipsos showed Harris's lead shrink to 1 point. You can check out some of the latest numbers and a look at the razor-thin margins in several swing states with a link in today's show notes. Former President Donald Trump has declined to commit to accepting the results of the 2024 election, and lawsuits challenging state voter rolls give a roadmap of how he could fight the outcome. Just last week, Trump posted on social media that election cheating should cease and desist, threatening prosecutions, quote, at levels unfortunately never seen before in our country, unquote. After losing the 2020 election, Trump allies filed more than 60 lawsuits challenging the results before a violent mob of supporters attacked the Capitol to prevent the transfer of power. While those efforts failed to overturn Trump's defeat, the mistrust from the election still reverberates, and current lawsuits from Republican groups and other Trump allies could lay the groundwork for a similar post-election effort. A leader of one Trump-aligned group behind these lawsuits told USA Today it is already, before Election Day, planning to sue over 2024 election results. Montana isn't typically the state that decides elections, but this year it holds all the cards, at least for the U.S. Senate. Next week, Montana voters will choose between a Republican former Navy SEAL new to politics or a third-generation farmer, an incumbent Democrat, hoping to prove the polls wrong. Montanans' pick will likely determine which political party controls the upper chamber for at least the next 2 years, as Democrats battle for every single seat to hold their majority. Democrats currently control the Senate by a narrow margin of 51 to 49, so Republicans only need to win 2 seats to flip the chamber. One is already all but guaranteed. Democrat-turned-independent Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia is retiring at the end of his term, leaving a safe spot for Republicans in that state. Democratic Montana Senator Jon Tester is up against Tim Sheehy, a veteran and wealthy entrepreneur in Montana. Less than 20 years ago, Montana was narrowly Republican, but it has shifted to deep red. For example, the state chose Senator John McCain over then-Senator Barack Obama by only 3 percentage points in 2008, but selected former President Donald Trump over now President Joe Biden by 16 percentage points in 2020. Still, Tester has managed to hold on through those changes, but Republicans and election forecasters are expecting this time may be different. Tester's previous victories relied on a vanishing breed of voter willing to support candidates of different parties for president and for Senate, also known as a ticket splitter. You can read more about that and this crucial race with a link in today's show notes. It's been just over a month since Helene devastated mountain towns in western North Carolina. And we're hearing new stories of heroes and heartbreak. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Rick Jervis about 3 stories from the town of Hot Springs. Rick, thank you for making some time for the excerpt today.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Would you start by telling us about Connor Goss? What was his story and his experience through this horrific nightmare?
Connor is a 26-year-old man. He had actually moved back to Hot Springs a couple of years earlier to work at his parents' hotel, the Iron Horse Station Inn. And it's a historic 2-story hotel. And he was working there that day when all these floods began to come in. And him and a number of other people there, they had to go up to the second story of the actual hotel and kind of ride it out there. As the water rose and rose and rose, they weren't sure whether the actual building was going to hold or not. There were multiple reports across the state of water coming into buildings and then just the building kind of demolishing. It just either knocked it out of its foundation or structurally kind of destroyed it. It also wasn't unknown how much the water was actually going to keep rising. So they basically had to be evacuated out of a second-story window onto a raft below.
You mentioned that raft. This was from another resident, Mitch Hampton, who really was deeply involved with recovery and relief efforts in this community. What can you tell us about Mitch and that raft and some of the work that he did using it?
He is co-owner of a rafting company called French Broad Adventures. Him and his wife, Corey, own it, along with his brother. He was basically recruited to try to rescue folks as they became trapped in their houses or buildings. Mitch and Corey and a couple of other people put their rafts into these floodwaters and started basically trying to rescue folks out of their homes. This actually proved to be an incredibly challenging situation because the water was moving so fast and so strong. And his raft is an inflatable raft, but it doesn't have a motor. So everything he actually did with the raft had to be through paddling. And so he had to figure out how to paddle through this kind of raging flood water to try to reach people and then get them back to safety. Mitch was actually called out to Marshall, which is not far from Hot Springs. They had a report of an elderly man who was in his 70s, Mr. Tipton, who had been in his mobile home, ripped his trailer apart and flung him down the floodwaters. He actually managed to grab a tree and held on for several hours. Mitch actually arrives. He basically hopped on the roof, trying to get a better look to how to get into the water and how to save Mr. Tipton. The problem was there actually was nowhere to stop once he got into the water. He basically told me later that there were spots where he could put in. There were spots he launched, but there wasn't anywhere near Mr. Tipton that could help him slow down enough to actually rescue him. So the danger there is that he would go into the water and he'd try to save him and he'd just rip right past him. And then past him was a dam, which was getting cluttered by all this debris. And if he didn't stop Mr. Tipton's tree, then he'd just be hurled down the actual river and into this dam. And he could have cost the actual lives of him and some of the other rescuers. He had to make the really tough sort of decision not to launch there, just wasn't safe enough. Unfortunately, Mr. Tipton hung on for a couple of more hours, and then witnesses saw him let go and just fall into the floodwaters.
It's absolutely devastating, Rick. You can imagine how many different folks have similar stories in the aftermath of Helene in these communities. I think one of the surreal aspects of this story, Rick, is what happens next and what has already happened. You know, the first few days after this storm hit. What was that like for this community, and really where do they go from here?
Shortly after the floods subsided, folks actually came out of their battered homes and businesses and just started to organize. They started to cook meals together. They served each other food. They made a plan to clean out the local hardware store first. They could take advantage of some of the tools in there to help clean out and fix some of the other businesses. But they really got together and on their own just started to pull themselves out of this muddy, destructive scene.
All right, I'll post a link in today's show notes for how listeners can help in the aftermath of Helene's devastation in this community. Rick Jervis is a national correspondent with USA Today. I thank you, Rick, for this story and coming on and discussing. I know it's an emotional, powerful tale, so thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Taylor.
You can read Rick's full story and hear from Connor and Mitch in their own words with a link in today's show notes. Deepfake videos are becoming more sophisticated, and with that is a sharp rise in non-consensual porn. Often, these videos target popular celebrities like Taylor Swift, but new research reveals that teens, especially middle and high school girls, are being targeted. Can legislation combat the rise in deepfake pornography? UCLA professor John Villasenor joins my co-host Dana Taylor to discuss what can be done to combat the rise of deepfake porn and how to protect our children. You can find it this afternoon beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on The Excerpt. And Diwali begins tomorrow. The Hindu festival of lights symbolizes the victory of light over darkness. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.